Only one day to go, folks, until WrestleMania 31. Welcome back to WrestleRant. Graham Jason Matthews here, where I give my in-depth analysis of every WrestleMania that I've watched in the WWE Network for the last couple of months. We are quickly approaching WrestleMania 31 on Sunday, which means we are wrapping up my WrestleMania reviews right here on the channel. So if you've been missing out on my reviews of 1 through 28, go back and watch them here on the channel. Just keep in mind that 17, 19, 20, and 21 are right here in WrestleRant, but last year. They were featured last year, so you got to go back a little bit further to watch those reviews. But in the meantime and in between time, folks, we got WrestleMania 29 here today. Of course, not everyone's favorite WrestleMania, and I share those same thoughts. And watching it back, I just watched it back yesterday, and it definitely is. I mean, it depends on what WrestleManias you watch before WrestleMania tomorrow. You can watch the best of the best, your favorite WrestleManias, and that's all well and good. But sometimes those great WrestleManias will get your expectations so high. I mean, they'll get you very, very excited, of course, but they'll get your expectations so high and at a standard that will never be met that WrestleMania 31 may not even come close. At least watching the bad WrestleManias, including 27 and 29 and all the others, will set your expectations pretty low. So that's what this WrestleMania accomplished for me watching it back. But kicking off the show itself, though, aside from the very odd pre-show match between Miz and Barrett that didn't really get much time and should have been on the card itself, but it was what it was. It's not on the network, so it's not even worth reviewing. And I watched this one on the network. I know my reviews of 24, 5, 6, 7, and 8 were all having watched on DVD because I own them on DVD. 29 is the only WrestleMania since '08 that I do not own on DVD, and I really have no intention to buy it unless I buy it for a very low price at like FYE or on Amazon or something. I'm not going to dish out a regularly priced DVD for WrestleMania 29. It's very not much worth it in my opinion. But kicking off the show itself, though, 6-man tag team action with The Shield, Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and Dean Ambrose taking on the very odd trio of Randy Orton, The Big Show, and Sheamus. Now, The Shield at this point had been built up so strongly as a dominant faction, dating back to their debut in the main event of Survivor Series only a couple months before this. So their placement on the card, I wish they would have got a little higher. I wish they had more of a high-profile match. But it wasn't like they were facing, like Zack Ryder and the Great Khali and, people of that stature. At least these guys are all former world champions. And it was a huge win. They got the clean victory, a big win for the Shield. And that's really the only positive thing I can say about it. I thought it was a good way to open up the show. I was fearful that kicking off the show with this matchup would kind of, I thought that kind of meant, that kind of, foreshadowed that the baby faces were going over and they were going to hand the Shield their first defeat. Thankfully, that was not the case. The match itself was good. The RKO out of nowhere to Seth Rollins, I know that's pretty cliche, but it literally was out of nowhere. Rollins jumping off the top rope and Orton catching with an RKO at the end, only to be speared by Roman Reigns in the end for the Shield to pick up the victory. But the match itself I thought was good. I really enjoyed the Shield victory, and that's, like I said, the only really positive things I can say about it. The trio of Orton, Sheamus, and Big Show really didn't make any sense. Sheamus had already battled the Shield at Elimination Chamber, so there was that history there. The Shield had attacked Randy Orton months prior, so there was that there. Just the Big Show, it just felt so predictable that he was going to turn heel or something, and he did after the match. So it was kind of like a sour way of going off of this contest. And I didn't really care to see him feud with either guy post-WrestleMania with either Orton or Sheamus or whoever, because he had already feuded with both guys beforehand, so I didn't really care to see that feud again. So that was the trio of those guys was kind of like their way of getting everybody on the show, because there was no huge multi-man match on the show aside from this contest. So that was kind of their way of squeezing Orton, Sheamus, and Big Show on the card. And I know at one point the rumors had speculated that Orton and Sheamus would be facing off for the World Heavyweight Championship. Maybe that was penciled in at one point, and then we got Del Rio and Swagger instead. And I know that was a fresh match, and it was fine for what it was, and I'll get to that in a minute. But at least Orton and Sheamus would have been justified in a world title match. I feel like Swagger especially, and again, I'll get to this when I get to the matchup to review it. It just felt out of place. At least Orton and Sheamus would have made more sense, despite the fact we had seen the feud before. But with Orton as a heel and Sheamus as a babyface, that dynamic of that feud we had never seen before. We had seen them both as babyfaces or both as heels, or with Sheamus at the heel as the heel and Orton as the babyface. We had never seen Orton as the heel and Sheamus as the babyface. Everyone was hoping, Orton should turn heel here. ultimately did not come to fruition until SummerSlam a couple months later. But and then we got the Big Show heel turn instead, unfortunately. So that's what that was what it was. It was what it was, pretty much. Not a bad match. I just didn't really care for the Big Show heel turn. It was good to see the Shield pick up another victory, but the match itself was fine, and the Big Show heel turn just did absolutely nothing for me. The first huge disappointment of the night came with the next match, Mark Henry versus Ryback. Almost botched that there, but this was a match in the card that I was actually looking forward to. I was and still am a huge Ryback fan. And I thought they were building up this matchup to be, it kind of felt that way as a clash of the Titans. Ryback, it was so poorly booked up to this point. I mean, I know, how can you say that? The guy was undefeated. How could you say that he's poorly booked? Because the guy, despite his undefeated streak being broken by CM Punk and Hell in a Cell, from his ascension to the main roster, had not won a match on pay-per-view. He lost the matches against Punk at Hell in a Cell and Survivor Series. He lost to TLC to the Shield. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. If he wins the Rumble or if he wins, a one-off match at Chamber, it's okay. He lost the Rumble, and then he got pinned. He didn't only lose at Elimination Chamber, he got pinned in a 6-man tag team match involving Cena and Sheamus, and Sheamus should have been the one to get pinned, but Ryback was the one to take the pinfall loss. So in my mind, I figured, okay, we get this big clash of the Titans between Mark Henry and Ryback at WrestleMania, and it leads to Ryback getting his big WrestleMania moment and finally winning on pay-per-view. It's only logical, right? Because Mark Henry, he's a great heel. He had been, built up strongly up to going up to WrestleMania, surprisingly, after kind of floundering for most of 2012. Was being built up very nicely going into this matchup to make it mean something. Ultimately, the matchup did not deliver. It was, I don't want to say a crap fest. It was just very, very boring. People were not into it. Even the commentators acknowledged it, that the crowd was turning against this event. I just did not really enjoy it whatsoever. I mean, it was pretty your standard big man matchup, but the emotion wasn't there, and Ryback had been so damaged up to that point that people just did not take him seriously against Mark Henry, who dominated him for most of the matchup. It wasn't like Ryback, was on offense for most of it, and then Mark Henry just came out of nowhere and won. Mark Henry dominated Ryback, and then he won clean. That was the worst part of all. So just a huge disappointment all the way around. Mark Henry, as Ryback was setting up the shell shock, people were, on their feet going crazy, and then Mark Henry fell on top of him, got the clean 1-2-3, and that was it. It was very, very disappointing. Really kind of took any buzz out of the matchup. I mean, Ryback hit the shell shocked afterwards anyway, so what was the fucking point? Why didn't you just have him win here, and then with that WrestleMania moment, by getting that shell shocked, give him a pay-per-view victory, and then that's how you pay off the whole Ryback storyline. Mark Henry could have taken the loss. The guy went on to fucking face Sheamus at the next pay-per-view, and he lost. So what did that win do for Mark Henry on this show? Ryback, on the other hand, I mean, maybe it was their way of, building towards the heel turn and losing, so then he, one final loss is what drove him over the edge to turn on John Cena the next night on Raw, which was a great moment, but the aftermath was complete shit. Maybe that's what kind of they were going for there. But again, why would I take Ryback seriously as a threat to the WWE champion, John Cena, at that period in time, if he just lost to Mark Henry, at WrestleMania in a pretty shitty match? Why should I take him seriously as the number one contender to the title? Like, that never made any sense to me. Maybe from a storyline standpoint, I get it. But if they're going to build him up to be the next number one contender, then losing to Mark Henry here did absolutely no favors for him whatsoever. So, very, very disappointing. The outcome was just stupid in my opinion. I like Mark Henry, but the outcome made absolutely no sense. And then Ryback got his WrestleMania moment, or, if he wants to claim that. I don't really call it a WrestleMania moment because he had just lost to Mark Henry, so people didn't really... When he hit it, people were like, yay, but it was not as loud of a pop as it would have been had he heard it, had he connected with it the first time around. So that just absolutely sucked all the way around. Up next, Tag Team Championships on the line, with Team Hell No, Kane and Daniel Bryan defending against Dolph Ziggler in the in-ring debut of Big E Langston, with AJ Lee in their corner. So, the match itself, they just kind of threw together at the last minute. I just remember being very disappointed that Dolph Ziggler wasn't in a higher match in the card. I mean, considering the latter half of 2012 that this guy had, I mean, taking into consideration everything he did in the months preceding this, he had a great showing at Survivor Series, the sole survivor after beating Randy Orton clean, beat John fucking Cena in the main event of TLC in December to retain possession of his Money in the Bank briefcase. He had a very strong showing in the Royal Rumble in January, the longest tenured superstar in that match, and one of the final last standing competitors before getting eliminated, so having an amazing showing in the Rumble, and that was it. I mean, then he was put into a tag team title match at WrestleMania. Personally, I would have just had Jericho either win the World Championship before Mania or have Ziggler cash in before WrestleMania, and then had Jericho win the Chamber at the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, that number one contenders chamber match to the World Heavyweight Championship at Mania. I would have had Jericho win that, Ziggler win the World Championship beforehand, then done that matchup at WrestleMania. Because you got to remember, they never really had their rubber match. I mean, they ended up having it like weeks after WrestleMania, but they did do it. They had Ziggler go over Jericho, have Jericho go over Ziggler at SummerSlam. Ziggler beat him the next night to ship him off into quote-unquote retirement to kind of get him fired from the WWE. And, they had that 1-1 record, so, odds showed, and the plan, it would have made sense had they had the rubber match at WrestleMania. And I don't even think that was the plan at all. I think the only other plan that was put in place was Jericho versus Ryback. And that wasn't a good feud either when they ended up doing it a couple months later. I think they were going to turn Jericho heel or Ryback heel, something. I mean, they ended up turning Ryback heel anyway, which was also equally stupid. But, that also would not have been a great match. I feel like Fandango benefited more than Ryback would have been when working Jericho at WrestleMania. And the route they went with those two, I guess, was better than the original plan. But Jericho versus Ziggler wrote itself. It made perfect sense. The match would have been great. It would have been a world title match that people actually cared about, unlike the one that we ended up getting on this show. But in regards to the tag team title match, I apologize for going off on a tangent, but the tag team title match itself, I thought was good. The only issue with it was that it felt like a Raw match. Down the stretch, people were into the near falls. When Ziggler hit the zigzag on Kane, people were really into it. But then, it was only 6 minutes long. It just felt like a tag team title match. Tag team title matches would get more time on any other fucking pay-per-view, much less WrestleMania, which is 4 hours long. They could have cut some time from one of the other matches in order to give this one some more time. It just wasn't memorable. It was a good match. Don't get me wrong. It was not terrible. But what did it really accomplish? Big E didn't get pinned. That was Ziggler. Just Big E ended up doing nothing anyway. I mean, he had that mini feud. He was Intercontinental Champion for a while, but even the fact that he made his in-ring debut on this WrestleMania did not feel historic. It was a good match. I love the opening spot, if anything else, with AJ, kissing Ziggler at ringside, and then Bryan hitting a kick, and then going for the pinfall, kind of shades of WrestleMania 28. That was probably the best part, easily the best part of the match. Everything else that was good, just nothing that was WrestleMania caliber quality. So a good match, just ultimately forgettable, and felt like something you would see on Raw, which is kind of the theme throughout the night. Chris Jericho versus Fandango up next. And again, I was not thrilled with this feud when it was first rumored. I didn't think they would actually go through with it, and they did. And I understand it was used to build up, Fandango and give him a huge win and kind of, launch his career on a high note, and it did for a time, for like a month, before the Fandango chance just got stupid after WWE made it uncool to do, and then he lost to Jericho at the next pay-per-view, and he was going to win the Intercontinental Championship. I think that was pretty much what killed his push, was that when he got injured and when he came back, they did nothing with him, and he hasn't been the same since. I hate the Fandango gimmick. I always thought it was stupid from the moment they called it up, and it's just a dumb gimmick. I don't hate the guy. Johnny Curtis, I think, is great. The guy's a very good athlete. That was very evident in this matchup. I thought he and Jericho had a really nice matchup. Someone mentioned to me on Twitter when I was live tweeting while watching this WrestleMania back a few days ago that they thought it was an underrated matchup. I don't know if I would necessarily call it underrated, but the wrestling aspect of it, I thought, yes, it was very, very good. Wasn't an all-time classic considering what happened to Fandango. It was ultimately a waste of Jericho at the event. Like I said earlier, I think they would have been better off just doing him and Ziggler. The story was there, Fandango and Jericho, the Dancing with the Stars tie-in. Okay, but what else is there to the matchup? Fandango got a big win, but at the end of the day, it went nowhere. In Jericho, they could have done something much more something a lot better with him at WrestleMania, especially considering the fact that he was in contention for the WWE title only a year prior against CM Punk in another great match. This very well wrestled match, but the aftermath was very poorly handled and just a waste. In retrospect, it was a waste. So up next for the World Heavyweight Championship, Alberto Del Rio defending the World Heavyweight title against Jack Swagger. Again, a good match, but I just could not get into it. From the moment that Swagger won the Elimination Chamber, I was thinking to myself, okay, cool, they're going with someone new. But the issue was Swagger. It wasn't like he was a fresh face. It wasn't like, he was an up-and-comer. The guy had had his time 3 years prior at WrestleMania 26 when he won the Money in the Bank, cashed it in, became world champion. The guy had his time, and it wasn't his fault that they fucked it up. It was just WWE's fault for the poor booking. And much like I said in my WrestleMania 26 review, one of the many reasons why Swagger bombed as world champion was because he was a joke going into that title reign. He really had no established victories. He was jobbing to Santino only, weeks before this. And almost coincidentally enough, almost ironically enough, that's what he was doing before he contended for the World Heavyweight Championship. Because you remember, for a majority of 2012, aside from that, forgettable reign as United States champion, he was losing all the time. And one of his last losses before he walked out on WWE, in storyline anyway, before leaving for a couple months, was against Santino. And the guy went nowhere after that. And he came back and, he won the chamber, but after you lose to Santino, there's a lot you need to do in order to make him a threat again. And, and to WWE's credit, they tried to do that. They tried to repackage him. They gave him Zip Coulter, new music, new gimmick, new finisher, everything. And I thought it was cool. I liked the Swagger gimmick. I think Swagger's really, really good. But it was too little too late. I feel like, they did not have enough time. That would have been a really good SummerSlam match. I think a lot of people were saying that at that time. I absolutely agree then and even now. Del Rio versus Swagger would have been a nice SummerSlam match. For WrestleMania, it was too much, too soon. And you throw in the fact that Swagger had got himself not suspended, but himself in trouble with the law when, he had possession of the DUI, or of the weed, and he had the DUI. And, it just didn't do anything for him. He ended up not getting a WrestleMania entrance. I guess that was his punishment, in the fact that he was never in world title contention again after that. But I guess that was ultimately his punishment, that he didn't do time, he didn't serve any time, he didn't, by that I mean he wasn't suspended for any finite period of time. He just did not get an entrance at WrestleMania. From what I hear, was actually pretty cool. He drove some Jeep down to the ring, and when they cut back from the video package, they just showed him in the ring, him and Coulter just cutting a promo. And maybe you can cite the fact that it was time constraints, and that was an aspect. Due to time constraints, Cena and Rock just felt fucking rushed, and I'll get to that in a minute. And the mixed tag team match was cut. But I just feel like it was punishment for Swagger. They had to find some way of spiting him because of his punishment, because of what he did. So that was kind of their way of doing it. And, people said, someone brought up to me, last night when I was watching this pay-per-view that, do you think, we can only wonder, we can only imagine what would have been had he not got suspended. And honestly, even going into it, I did not think that the original plan was for Swagger to win the world title. I never entertained that idea for a split second. I always thought the plan was for Del Rio to go over, because it would have made no sense for Ziggler to cash in on a heel like Swagger, unless they were turning him babyface. And they did eventually, but I don't think that was ever the plan. That just kind of happened as Ziggler got injured. But regardless, though, I think with Del Rio, the plan was always for him to retain at WrestleMania. That's why they built up Swagger so strongly, and Del Rio was ultimately going to go over in the end, retaining the title. I don't think the plan was ever to put the title back on Swagger. He was merely a filler opponent before Del Rio went on to feud with Ziggler over that championship, which I thought was a mistake. I think the world title could have been, I'm glad that it got higher up on the card as opposed to its placement on the card at 27 and 28. It was good placement, but the match itself, there were some good moments, and it was well wrestled, but the story was there too. But again, it just wrong players. Del Rio was still trying to get over as a babyface, and Swagger was still trying to get over as a main event guy. Just the wrong people at the wrong time, pretty much what it was. The wrong players and at the wrong time on the road to WrestleMania with Swagger and Del Rio. So a well-wrestled match, and it's not going to go over well when people are chanting, "We want Ziggler," after the contest. That was another thing I was disappointed with, that Ziggler did not cash in on this show. And I mean, it was very well worth it the next night when we got that amazing moment when he cashed in the night after WrestleMania on Raw, becoming the World Heavyweight Champion. And, you can argue that the match, that moment was better off on Raw, considering the fact that it was a very compact arena and, that crowd went crazy. but I still feel like Ziggler could have been the first one to, cash in at WrestleMania. No one has ever done that. Seth Rollins might do that on Sunday for all we know, 10 years into the Money in the Bank, lineage. That has never ever happened. But I feel like that could have happened with Ziggler. There was really no reason for that to happen on Raw as opposed to at WrestleMania. And I know the reaction was amazing. I'm not taking anything away from that. Don't take this as complaining. But I feel like Ziggler could have been a saving grace of this show had he cashed in here as opposed to the next night on Raw. But still an amazing moment, regardless of when it happened. Up next, the only saving grace from this show, in my opinion, The Undertaker versus CM Punk. The story itself, this is where we can really ask, what could have been? Had Paul Bearer not legitimately passed away, what would have been the story for this matchup? But Punk made it work. I thought some of the things they did kind of crossed the line a little bit, for better and for worse. But they made it work. I think it could have been enhanced if, CM Punk was still WWE Champion, the title versus a streak. People would have said, oh, why is Undertaker WWE Champion? He could have just retired the next night. Just retired with the championship the next night. And I would have been completely fine with that. There was absolutely no reason to keep on bringing Undertaker back at WrestleMania. There was no reason to bring him back, for this matchup or at 30 or even this year. Just let the guy fucking retire. I love Taker. I respect the hell out of the guy. That goes without saying. And the match itself was great. And without this matchup, maybe this WrestleMania would have blew even more. It probably would have been the worst. This was the only really, really good thing about this WrestleMania, in my opinion. But, like I said in my WrestleMania 28 review, I still feel like that match against Triple H inside Hell in a Cell should have been his final match ever. He should have just been done after 20-0. That's it. 21-0, a great match. Those two wrestled a very, very well-wrestled match. His best well-wrestled matches since his one with Shawn. His matches with Shawn, I felt like, the ones with Triple H were amazing and all, but for a different reason, from a storytelling standpoint. And this was the best well-wrestled matchup that Taker had since 26 with Michaels. It didn't really do anything for CM Punk, but the guy was already established, top guy anyway. And, I've said this before, I feel like if they were going to break the streak anyway, and, part of it was due to the fact that it was WWE Network and give you a feel that anything can happen. I get it. But if they really wanted to break the streak, I feel like CM Punk could have been a perfect candidate, as RJ has said in the past too, Randy Orton or even Michaels in either of their matches. I still say the streak should not have been broken at all, but if it was going to be broken, then it should have been broken against any of those opponents, including CM Punk. I feel like, what do you still have left? I really have no idea. But you can make the same argument for Brock Lesnar. The guy was set to leave, and don't give me that he's staying. The original plan was that he was leaving. They did not know until, just recently that he was staying with WWE. So the long-term plan was that he was on his way out. So why have a guy that's, leaving the company break the streak? The same thing goes with CM Punk. Even though he was not on his way out just yet, they could have very well just had him break the streak. And I would have been completely okay with that, considering he was a, not an up-and-comer, but he was, a better candidate than a guy like a Triple H or something. But, a great matchup from Punk and Undertaker. And the best part about the matchup are the single best entrance from that WrestleMania, in my opinion, along with the Undertaker's. But this is just because I'm a huge CM Punk mark. Them performing Cult of Personality Living Color, not Live Color. What the fuck am I saying? Living Color, I believe it is. Performing CM Punk's theme live as he made his entrance, I thought was just, it gave me chills watching it then, watching it back. I thought it was great. Easily my favorite WrestleMania entrance ever. I thought it was really, really cool. My favorite entrance theme ever, Cult of Personality. So for them to perform it live, which I thought they should have done at 28 in his match against Jericho, I thought for them to do it here was absolutely phenomenal. I loved it. So great stuff there, and I love the matchup too. Triple H versus Brock Lesnar, the no-holds-barred matchup, whereas if Triple H lost, he would have had to retire. So with this matchup, contrary to what some might believe, I actually enjoyed the build-up. The SummerSlam match did not overly impress me. There was really no need for a rematch. To drag the feud on for a fucking year was way too much. You could have just ended it here, but they wanted to give Lesnar his win back. It was a complete fucking waste. I will say that much. The matches weren't terrible, but they were not good enough to justify it being a year-long rivalry and basically wasting a year of Brock Lesnar's time at those two pay-per-views at WrestleMania and Extreme Rules the following month. He could have worked other people. He did not need to work Triple H for 3 times. That was just overbearing and unnecessary, in my opinion. The match itself was good. The only issue with it was its placement on the card. I guess, originally they were going to have the buffer match, with the Funkadactyls and the Bell Twins and the Road Scholars, whoever, and they couldn't do that due to time constraints. The top 3 main events, Punk and Taker, H and Lesnar, and Cena and Rock all exceeded 20 minutes. That's a solid hour of your 4 hours right there. And that's not counting entrances and live performances. The live performance by Diddy, I didn't really mind. I liked the I'm Coming Home song. I'm Coming Home. I thought that was a good song, so I didn't really mind the performance. Most of the performances I really don't mind if they're good. Like the Wiz Khalifa stuff on Raw, I just didn't get. At a 4-hour WrestleMania, I get it. It's a sports entertainment spectacular. I understand. So I didn't mind that part of it. But you could have cut out that in favor of the WrestleMania 8-man tag team match. Was I, overly pissed they didn't have in the card? No, would it have made a difference? Probably not. But I mean, it sucks for Cody Rhodes and Damian Sandow, who are not able to get their WrestleMania payoff or WrestleMania match because of poorly timed out time constraints. So that sucked for them. And also, No America the Beautiful, too. That's been a WrestleMania tradition since, the beginning of the event back in 1985. And they cut it out from that year for some reason. And they didn't do it at WrestleMania 30 either. And I guess, from what I've heard, they're bringing it back this year. So hopefully they timed it out right so it won't be an issue this year. But I feel like you could have got that performance to give, to bring in that buffer match, or either to do that or the America the Beautiful at the start of the show. But specifically the buffer match, because that was what killed Triple H and Lesnar. No crowd involvement whatsoever. The match itself was good. The involvement of No Holds Barred and Shawn Michaels, it made it exciting for me. I was probably as excited for that match as I am for Sting and Triple H this year. I thought it was a really good story. The only issue with it was its placement on the card, and people just didn't care. That and the fact that they knew Triple H was coming out victorious. I feel like the retirement stipulation hurt it more than it helped it, because people knew that Triple H was going to win. The rematch itself was unnecessary, but I feel like the stipulation was just null and void. It didn't make any sense because people knew he was going to win. That's why they didn't react as fondly to it as maybe officials would have hoped or would have liked. Even though they came alive for the final few minutes, but that was about it. Triple H came out victorious. Good match, just not even boring. Just people just weren't into it due to its placement on the card right after the very, very hot Punk and Taker match. So we get to the main event, John Cena versus The Rock, the twice-in-a-lifetime matchup from the WWE Championship. Watching it back, I didn't like it then. I don't like it now. I mean, that goes without saying, but one thing that stood out to me then, and even watching it back, was that everything about this just felt rushed. After the great entrances the year before, and Rock's entrance kind of got dragged out a little bit, but the concerts and everything about that WrestleMania, I thought was great. Like the build up to that matchup, was 10 times better than anything they did for this one. But the entrances felt special. For this one, Cena ran down there, Rock ran down there, did the quick entrances, and that was it. And it didn't really capture that WrestleMania feel. It just felt like any other matchup. And the pinfalls were like, hey, 1, 2, and the kick out. It wasn't like 1, 2, oh, you know what I mean? It didn't even have to be dragged out. They didn't allow enough time for things to sink in. It was just finisher, 1, 2, oh, finisher, 1, 2, oh, finisher, 1, 2, oh, you know what I mean? It was this constant back and forth. And there was never enough time to just let it sink in like at WrestleMania 28. And like I said, I attribute a lot to time constraints, but the match ended 20 minutes short of 4 hours. So they very well could have gone another 5 minutes. There was no need to rush it. And the match itself was not good. It was constant finishers. And it was maybe a better wrestled match than the year before. Rock was in a little better shape. He was still gassed out beyond belief. And it was better wrestled than the year before. I still maintain that. Just the build was unnecessary because we all fucking knew that Cena was going to win. It was so predictable. Twice-in-a-lifetime bullshit just hindered the build to the first one, even though I enjoyed it just as much as I did then. It just was completely unnecessary. So that's what hurt this matchup in the long run, was the predictability. The crowd sat on their hands for the entire matchup. Like I said on Twitter a couple days ago, it went over like a fart in church. And that people just were not into it whatsoever because they knew who was going to win, so why bother caring? And then Cena won. I mean, The only good thing I can say about the matchup was they didn't even tell a good story. It was constant finishers back and forth. But the only good moment of it that I really, really liked was Cena going for the people's elbow, I think it was, like he did the year before. And then, Rock jumped up just in time, and then Cena hit the AA. I thought that was a great spot, kind of tying in from last year to the finish of the previous matchup between these two. That was it, though. Really ended the night on a sour note. And I noted this on Twitter, and some people didn't really agree with it, but, I thought Cena and Rock embracing each other at the top of the stage was completely unnecessary, and it still disgusts me, because I don't think it was necessary. Someone argued that, you needed you needed Rock to embrace Cena and pass the torch. No, you didn't. No, you absolutely did not. And it's not like Rock and Hogan at all. I know that's what they were trying to mirror, but even though Rock was booed by the Toronto crowd that night, it was only because they loved Rock so much. That was not the case in the show. They did not overly love Rock. Rock as champion, again, was not great because people knew how the story was going to go down. That was unpredictable, and they enjoyed it. Rock was, he left a couple months after that, and he was already established too, like John Cena was on the show. But the biggest thing about this, for me, and I'm sure many others as well, was that Cena and Rock had spent 3 goddamn years blasting each other on Twitter and in their promos and attacking each other and all this other shit. And then you expect us to think that they're okay, they respect each other. Rock has said, for years that that's not that case. He did not respect him. And then why do it? I feared we would get this at 27. I feared we would get it at 28, and then ultimately we got it at 29. It was just, a very, very anticlimactic way of going off the show. Had Cena, turned or attacked Rock, or Rock ended the show victorious or something like that, not ended victorious, or ended the show as the last man standing tall, then maybe it would have saved it. Maybe. I mean, it's hard to say. But, just still, I just thought it was really, really stupid, considering the fact they spent so much time saying how much they hate each other, and then we're just all of a sudden supposed to suspect that they're on good terms and they respect each other. It was such bullshit. And that's why, on the whole, I didn't enjoy this WrestleMania, because not only was every single match, for the most part, just completely predictable, and the outcomes were foreshadowed weeks in advance, it was the fact that nothing coming out of this WrestleMania made me excited for the future. Nothing made me excited to watch Raw the next night, which is ultimately what WrestleMania should do. Not only should it end rivalries and be the culmination of everything from the year building up to this point, it should also make you looking forward to the future. Especially for a casual fan, like they just saw Cena beat Rock. Why would they want to tune into Raw the next night, So I just walked away from WrestleMania that night just extremely, not even disappointed like I was with 27, just lackluster. It was very, very lackluster, and like I've said this, time and time again. I said it then, I'll say it now. It felt like a 4-hour Raw. Aside from the Taker Punk match, every one of these matches, including Cena and Rock, felt like matches you would see on other pay-per-views or even on Raw in the main event. That's what ultimately killed the show for me. Granted, they had a huge turnaround the next night with the Ryback heel turn, which went nowhere, of course, but the moment itself was great. The Ziggler cash-in and everything else that went on, the post-WrestleMania Raw, that's what saved them, what kicked WrestleMania 29's ass, ultimately. But, WrestleMania itself, going off the air, I'm thinking, what the fuck is there to look forward to? At least with 28, Rock beats Cena. What happens next? With Cena beating Rock and them embracing each other, it just left me like, what is there to look forward to? And then, we got the next night's Raw, which saved it, but that should have happened at WrestleMania. So a very lackluster WrestleMania. Disappointing? No, because I did not have my expectations set high. I was hoping they would exceed my expectations. It was everything I thought it was going to be. It was extremely predictable, and it was just, I went into it unexcited, and I left it unexcited either, as well. I left it just thinking, meh. There's nothing, about this that really makes me amped up for the next night's Raw. You know what I mean? So at least they succeeded with that in the next night's Raw. But on the whole, though, WrestleMania 29, do not watch it back on the WWE Network. I know we're only one day away from WrestleMania 31, and in that precious time, in the next 24 hours, do not waste your time watching this WrestleMania. Of the 30, do not waste it watching this one. A very predictable show, and maybe, I was almost there. It was the closest WrestleMania that's been to me since I started watching back in 08, and I almost went. I would have gone had I had the money. I wasn't working at that time, so my parents weren't going to take me there, and I'm glad. Being in there in person, it would have been great. I mean, I'm not going to argue that. For people that were there, people would have loved it. I would have loved it. It's a completely different atmosphere being there live than it would have been watching from home. But I feel like there's other better WrestleManias that I could be in attendance for, including SummerSlam this upcoming August, which should be stellar. But that's another story for another day. WrestleMania 29, just very, very lackluster. Do not waste your time watching it back on the WWE Network. And instead, spend that time watching WrestleMania 30, which I'll be back reviewing here tomorrow on the channel. So in the meantime, in between time, folks, you guys can catch me on Twitter at WrestleRant, on Facebook at Graham Jason Matthews. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All support is greatly appreciated. Continue to stay excited and amped up and anticipating WrestleMania tomorrow night. I'm sure as hell looking forward to what should be a very interesting and fun show, to say the least. So in the meantime, once again, folks, have a great weekend, and I'll catch you guys here tomorrow for my review of WrestleMania 30.